You know, I tend to surprise myself way too frequently when it comes to the media I'm willing to sit through, let alone place on a pedestal as some of the finest work I've ever experienced. Hyouka is an odd beast. I chose to watch it after searching up shows that are similar to Haruhi, which, by the way, the only thing these two have in common is they're both children of the same awesome mother. And once the credits rolled for the final episode, I thought to myself that was really good, and I immediately added it to my list of video ideas. A few months passed, and once the time came for me to start writing, I did a complete rewatch of the show to figure out exactly why I liked it so much. Because I admittedly tend to turn my brain off whenever I'm watching something for the first time, especially in Hyouka's case where I watched it with my brother. And it was with this rewatch that I realized Hyouka wasn't nearly as good as I remembered. It was way better, which means we're doing things a little differently this time. There won't be any internal conflicts about simultaneously hating and loving a show. No, dude. The only reason I'm here today is to explain why I adore Hyouka as much as I do. So please, take a seat, maybe have a nice cup of tea, and let me be the one to formally welcome you to the Classics Club, a place that will challenge not only your critical thinking, but your desires to be entranced by any other show. The story of Hyouka begins with Totaraum, a freshman in high school and a self-proclaimed energy conservationist. He has a calm personality and brilliant deduction skills, which he adamantly refuses to use because he lives by the creed that any high school student worth their salt would.
やらなくてもいいことならやらない。やらなければいけないことなら手短に。
He's best friends with Satoshi Fukube, a happy-go-lucky bro character in self-proclaimed database. He's known Oriki since middle school, and hold on a second. Do you hear that?
へえ、まさかね。宝太郎が？
俺木宝太郎は義に厚く情が深いんだ。
飯食いに行こうぜ。それと便座カバー。俺は飯だけでいい。
That, my friends, is the sweet angelic sound of Clanad 2. Mayaka Ibara is a strong-willed manga club member who's known Oriki since elementary school, although she doesn't seem to like him very much. The opposite is true for Satoshi though, as she's had a crush on him since middle school. Now this will be where things stagnate. Three friends move on to high school together and continue to live their lives in peace, but then enter stage left Eru Chitanda. She's currently the only daughter of a long lineage of wealthy farmers, and she ends up joining the Classics Club at school for personal reasons regarding her uncle. But her most important trait by far is her bottomless supply of curiosity. Hyouka definitely isn't the most popular show out there, but chances are if you know anything about it, it's the phrase "I'm curious."
Moshi Moshi?
Hey, I just had a quick question for you. Do you know who Eru Chitanda is?
The bi-curious one, right?
Yeah, close enough.
Like 16 years old, like 5'3", maybe like 54 kilograms, and like with the black hair, purple eyes.
Whoa. What?
What are you talking about?
Why do you know that?
What are you talking about?
No, it's bad. What is
I
wrong
like her.
with you?
What are you talking about?
Do you need therapy?
Yeah?
Okay, we'll go tomorrow.
Sick.
The most important aspect of this trait, however, is the way it puts Oriki's energy-conserving life in jeopardy. Because whenever Chitanda's curiosity is piqued, who else would she turn to than the guy who has a knack for making deductions? It sounds pretty annoying for someone who's trying to conserve energy, but surely one person can't simply erase years of collective apathy, right?
気になります。私、なぜ閉じ込められたんでしょう。
Oh crap, she's good at this. And thus begins the struggle between the girl with boundless curiosity and the guy who wants nothing to do with it, but for whatever reason can't say no to her. This means that almost every story in the show revolves around mysteries. But not traditional ones from literature like murders. No, the mysteries in this show are much more simple. Stuff like, why did my teacher forget the lesson plan? What was the director's original intention for an unfinished amateur film? Or what happened at this school festival 45 years ago? Now, you might be thinking, wow, that sounds really boring. And yeah, you're right. No, damn it, I wasn't done yet! On a surface level, these mysteries sound horrible, but if there's one thing Hyouka is good at, it's making the mundane interesting. First of all, this show was made by Kyoto Animation, the studio that makes 8-year-old shows look like they came out in the future. It's been wonderful binging through their back catalog of works and watching their skills improve as time goes on, and Hyouka is one of their biggest spikes in quality to date. It is, in my opinion, a masterpiece of animation. If anyone out there is interested in visual storytelling, I urge you to study this show. The composition of each shot is used to guide your eyes to wherever KyoAni wants them to be. For example, the culprit for the Jumoji case is extremely obvious if you're looking at the whole picture, yet your eyes are pulled away from him first by a phone ringing on the opposite end of the screen and then a large explosion in the middle of the frame. Every episode also uses its shots to tell a story without saying a single word. Minor things like putting a massive pillar in between two characters who are having a misunderstanding with each other to create a clear visual divide between them, or utilizing lighting to its full potential by bathing characters in light or shadow to effectively capture the mood. We never hear Chitanda's response to Mayaka regarding whether or not she likes somebody, but you better believe that when the scene ends, we cut to a shot of Oriki. Animation is such a powerful art form because while it's a tedious pain to produce, it also gives you complete and total control over every single variable. Every frame becomes a playground for the creator that gives them the tools they need to fulfill their artistic vision to the fullest. Kyoto Animation has always been fantastic when it comes to maximizing the visual potential a scene has. Their detailed facial expressions and signature charm ensure that every frame is bursting with character. Not to mention the OPs and EDs for this show are fantastic because of their visual storytelling. If you know anybody who skipped the intro or outro for the second half of this show, even if it was just once, I'm sorry to say that you might have to do something that will have serious consequences for the rest of your life, but on God, you'd be doing the world a favor. Something unique about Hyouka is the characters spend most of their time just talking to each other. I mean, they have to. Most mysteries are solved by a group of people bouncing ideas off of one another. So in order to make this interesting, their conversations feature these fun visualizations of whatever the group is talking about. It's just another addition that goes a long way towards making this show pleasing to the eyes. And to me, the most pleasing thing about this show's presentation is its style. If there's one thing I really appreciate when it comes to a piece of media, it's when it picks a distinct style and runs with it as far as it can. Hyouka's identity is deeply rooted in its appreciation for the works that its so-called classics club should really be studying instead of going around solving mysteries. Its color palette of deep greens and browns evoke visions of nature in the past. The music does a fantastic job of keeping this classical tone, and some of Bach and Beethoven's most famous pieces are added into the mix for good measure. The visual design gives every location a sense of aged elegance, and the majority of the mysteries contain callbacks to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Agatha Christie's most famous works. With all of these elements in its corner, Hyouka ended up having all the charm of a rustic cafe, and if you stacked it up next to KyoAni's other shows, it would be the kind old grandmother who has to keep Haruhi and Nichijou in check whenever they decide to blow up a toilet. But these are the things that surround the show, and while these elements were perfected, they aren't what ultimately draws people in. That responsibility belongs to the mysteries and the characters. Despite the fact that I called the mysteries mundane earlier, I think they're extremely well executed. The facts for the newest case begin to build almost immediately when a new episode starts, allowing for audience speculation that grows more accurate over time until Oriki inevitably explains why you're wrong. The structure for most of these mysteries is almost textbook, but nonetheless, I found them to be engaging. In fact, the movie mystery arc had an absolutely beautiful moment that I want to share. For context, this mystery is about an unfinished class film written by Mayu Hongo, who fell ill before its completion. The Classics Club is instructed by Fuyumi Irisu, a cold and manipulative classmate of Hongo's, to watch the footage they have so far and try to deduce how Hongo intended the film to end. The movie itself is about a group of friends who wind up in a mansion where one of them ends up dead inside a locked room scenario. I mentioned before that that I watched this show with my brother, so we were both theorizing the entire time it was playing. I immediately noticed how poor the camera work was, because every single shot was filmed in first person, and commented that the only reasons you could have to do something like this are 1, you're a dumbass, or 2, the cameraman is one of the characters. Wait a second. So I quickly locked in my theory that the cameraman was the murderer and the film's found footage perspective was just being used as a narrative trick. Oriki ended up coming to the same conclusion I did, which admittedly made me way too proud of myself. But immediately after the finished movie was screened, Oriki got dragged into 3 separate scenes where each of his clubmates explained why he was wrong. They claimed that, while it was an entertaining film, it was inconsistent with Hongo's vision due to a number of factors Oriki neglected to take into account. As more time passed and more clues and theories were presented, my brother speculated that Hongo's insistence on a very small amount of fake blood and the fact that Oriki's conclusion was wrong because he didn't take Hongo's feelings into account means she never intended for somebody to die in the first place. Lo and behold, that was the key to solving the mystery. In other words, I came up with the most interesting answer while he came up with the correct one, which made perfect sense because of the two of us, I'm the creative thinker and he's boring. But what isn't boring in the slightest is Oriki's journey through this arc. The main conflict in Hyouka revolves around making a choice between a lively rose-colored life or an average gray-colored one. It's made clear from his first lines in the show that Oriki has chosen to live a normal gray-colored life. He doesn't care about being lauded as a great detective. In fact, when people bring up his talents, he shrugs them off by saying he just got lucky. But ever since he met Chitanda, his perspective has changed little by little every day due to watching this group of rose-colored high schoolers interact as the lone outsider and getting dragged into their troubles. And by the time Irisu sits him down to ask for help with the movie mystery, he's very conflicted about which of these paths he wants to walk. Irisu begins by saying 3 different people have vouched for his talents as a detective and then hits him with something he never knew he wanted to hear.
君は特別よ。
Rose-colored petals flutter into the frame as the room gains a distinct pink tint. Of course, Oriki tries to say he just gets lucky, to which Irisu responds by saying everyone ought to recognize who they are, or it just makes fools of those watching them. This has to be it. The magic ticket for leading this new kind of life. With this talent, even someone like me can crawl my way out of this gray-colored life. So he uses it to what he thinks is the best of his ability, and Irisu decides to go with his theory and finish the film. But after the pre-screening, Mayaka starts to explain why she thinks his deductions were completely wrong as the frame splinters into grayscale, because if it wasn't already obvious, Oriki made a crucial mistake. After that conversation with Irisu, his viewpoint on his talents changed, and this newfound hubris led him to accept whatever deduction he made about the film without second guessing or considering Hongo, because why wouldn't he be right? He's talented. He's living a rose-colored life. But it turns out the reason Irisu said what she said was so she could manipulate Oriki into finishing the script for her. She was acting for Hongo's sake so her distaste for stories where people die in them didn't come under ridicule by her murder-happy classmates. Oriki claims to be relieved by what she said, but comes out looking more dejected and frustrated than I ever imagined he was capable of being. His 3 friends immediately picked up on his behavior, and eventually he was able to move past this event by solving another mystery with them at a public pool, where he learns that even if he's wrong, he knows that he'll be forgiven, not only by his friends, but by himself. This was just a taste of his progression throughout the show, and it's a testament to how deep and interesting the characters of Hyouka really are. The other 3 leads are the same as Oriki, each of them wrestle with complicated problems that lead to an exponential amount of growth. But if I want to show that off, I can't think of a better place to start than the school festival arc. Hyouka's school festival arc is honestly intimidating. The events, themes, and subtext in these episodes flow as seamlessly as water and are as interconnected as Lordran. It's an absolute majesty to behold, and while writing this segment, I tried my best to figure out as much about it as possible, so when I share my interpretations, I don't come off as a total dumb brain. In other words, I set expectations for myself and ended up feeling inadequate because of them. Which is funny, because after watching through 2 or 3 times, I concluded that the Hyouka's thought process is exactly what these episodes are about. Our story begins as the festival is starting and trouble immediately descends upon the club as Hyouka ordered 200 copies of their anthology to sell instead of the intended amount of 30. So the entire club splits up and moves through the festival in order to promote the Classics Club, creating their own little stories along the way. Satoshi's plan is to go around and do as many festival activities as possible while plugging the anthology at every turn. In other words, he just wants to go have fun. I wish him good luck with that, because at every turn he seems to run into Koriyuki Tani, the physical embodiment of both pee-pee and poo-poo.
Get the fuck out of my sight before I demolish you.
The dude acts like he's Satoshi's sworn nemesis and he jumps into every conversation with him looking for a competition.
それじゃ待て待て引き分けのままじゃ気が済まん勝負しようぜ次はどこに出る明日のお料理券かなオーケーこの勝負の白黒はそこでつけよう期待してるぞ
It's almost physically painful to listen to him try so hard to feel like he's superior to somebody else. Satoshi has absolutely no interest in him nowadays, but rewind the clock 1 year and these two were essentially the same person. The fact that he doesn't even recognize Tani when he sees him again is proof of how far he's come since then, and we later learn that he sees this change as an extremely positive one. However, for the rest of Hyouka, the cracks of this development are going to show, starting with him reverting back to his overly competitive mindset once the Jumoji incident starts. The Jumoji incident is the mystery of this arc, and it centers around a lone phantom thief who steals items from certain clubs and leaves letters validating the crimes. It catches the attention of everybody at school, especially Satoshi when he hears about it from the executive committee president, Jiro Tanabe. He sets off on a quest to catch Jumoji by himself, but Oriki is always one step ahead of him despite the fact that he doesn't even care about solving the mystery. He's only doing this to satisfy Chitanda's curiosity. Satoshi gets frustrated with him whenever he seems to know something he doesn't about the case because of how inadequate he feels about his own abilities. He laments the fact that Oriki seems to be utilizing his talents to the fullest now, all thanks to meeting Chitanda. Even though it's something he knows he should look at with happiness for his friend, he says to himself, is that something I can look at and just think, that's nice? And when he finishes talking to Oriki to help him move his thinking along, Satoshi steps into the shadows and says to himself he has high hopes for him. We won't know the implications of this phrase until a conversation he has with Hyouka after the case has been solved takes place. Tani shows up for the final time and claims to be disappointed that Satoshi couldn't catch Jumoji because he had high expectations of him, which gives Satoshi credence to critique his use of the word. To him, expectations is a word you use when you've stopped believing in yourself. It's a word you use when you've given up and reluctantly pass on the torch to somebody else, just like what he did with Oriki. Hyouka asks him if expectations, and by extension jealousy, are what he feels when he looks at Oriki. This is where everything starts to make sense. Satoshi was slipping back into his old habits, this obsessive, inadequate side of himself he's been trying to bury for over a year, all because of his expectations of Oriki. He says back to Hyouka that he's always looking up to him, which is something she wouldn't understand. But she corrects him by saying she does in reference to her own journey through this arc. For most of the runtime, Hyouka's responsibilities lie with the manga club, whom she does not have the best relationship with. Her only real friends there are the president Shoko Yuasa and a few others who are unnamed. The rest are overly passive-aggressive towards her, the worst offender being Ayako Kochi. She eggs Hyouka on by claiming the club's idea to sell manga reviews is awful because there's no point in making them. Since everything is subjective, every piece of media has exactly the same amount of value, and the masterpieces are determined not by quality, but by popularity. Now, if you think this is the stupidest thing you've ever heard in your life, then congratulations. You're human. Hyouka proves her humanity by firing back, saying she'll convince Kochi that masterpieces are made the second they're written by bringing a manga that was sold at last year's festival called A Corpse by Evening. One problem though. She can't find it. What she does find, however, is another manga called Body Talk, which she claims isn't worth taking in to show. It's really good, but it's just one step below A Corpse by Evening in her eyes. She does admit that it's 100 steps ahead of anything she's made though. The next day, Mayuka has a conversation with Shoko, who claims Kochi doesn't really mean what she says, because she was friends with the author of A Corpse by Evening, Haruna Anjo, until she transferred schools. This raises the question, why would she say what she said if she knew the manga existed? But Shoko refuses to elaborate further. After receiving the manga from Oriki, long story, Mayuka confronts Kochi, who said she was just kidding, just like Shoko said she would. It turns out she gave up on reading A Corpse by Evening because she's a manga artist herself, and she knew Haruna was a first-timer who didn't read much manga at all. By all accounts, she was inexperienced and shouldn't have been able to produce anything special. For people to call her work a masterpiece, no, for people to imply that where this person started is automatically better than anything you've ever done is going to sting. A lot. So she pushed it away because she couldn't confront that kind of inadequacy. She can't form expectations of Haruno, call her up and say she's excited for the next one, because if there's any truth to what Satoshi said about expectations, what does that say about herself? She draws a symbol on the railing and leaves, a symbol that Mayuka immediately recognizes from Body Talk, the manga that wasn't quite as good as A Corpse by Evening, but is still, in her own words, 100 times better than her own work. This harkens back to what Irisu was talking about with Oriki. What happens to the little guy when the person they look up to loses their confidence, when they're crushed by their own inadequacy? Well, in Mayuka's case, all she can do is let all of her built-up frustrations finally collapse, and this is why she understood how Satoshi was feeling. So if you find yourself in this kind of situation, what should you do? Well, Chitanda may have found an answer during her journey. She was delegated to negotiating deals with several different people in an effort to sell more anthologies, but she is just really bad at it. For one thing, she gets distracted by every single thing she sees because, and say it with me now,
she was curious.
That's right. And once she eventually does make it to somebody, she can't say the right things to save her life. Even if she has a valid reason to be asking what she's asking, she just dumps a request on people with no context. And when she's politely refused because she wasn't trying to be persuasive at all, she just walks away. Tanabe has to force her to come back and tell him why she's asking to let the Classics Club sell their anthologies elsewhere. The newspaper club president blows her off twice because she doesn't even try. And when Irisu holds out her hand asking for an anthology so she can help the Classics Club sell them, even after getting coached by Irisu in the ways of manipulation, she still fumbles all over herself. These escapades come to a close when she goes on the school radio and does her best to plug Hyouka by using the Jumoji incident to drive sales. It goes about as well as you'd expect. And once it's all over, she's completely exhausted. She knows that she isn't cut out for negotiating and she hates having to do it, which is exactly what she tells Irisu when she politely tries to tell her this just isn't her thing, much to her surprise. Irisu was hesitant to shut Chitanda down because she knew very well what kind of power expectations hold over an individual. So for Chitanda to brush it off and be content with just being herself was a shock to her. I think it's easy to say Chitanda's story is about quitting while you're behind, but I think it's more about how to deal with the weight of great expectations. It's okay that there are thousands of people who are more proficient at something than you are. You should never quit doing something you love because of this, but you should also be realistic when it comes to growth. Some people are naturally talented and they soak up the expectations of everybody who can't compare. It's unfair, it doesn't make sense, but it's okay. When you look at those people and form these great expectations of yourself because you feel inferior to them, that's where you go wrong. Sometimes all you can do is all you can do, and the two people who understand this perfectly are Chitanda and Oriki. Oriki already learned his lesson about expectations in the movie arc, so he plays a relatively passive role when it comes to character development, save for one moment. Another nail is added to the coffin of Oriki's personal motto when he wastes a spectacular amount of energy to save the Classics Club from losing a cooking competition. Hearing him scream for Satoshi to come pick up a vital ingredient from him was absolutely jaw-dropping. Keep in mind, this is the guy who used to purposely wait for people to leave a room he has business in because he doesn't want to waste energy talking to them. Other than that, Orki spent his time watching over and selling the anthologies while engaging in a Zelda-esque trade quest with the people who showed up. He turns a broken pen into a button, into a Glock, into a bag of flour, into a hand mirror, until finally arriving at a corpse by evening. This is used not only by Mayuka to confront Kochi, but by Orki himself to figure out the true culprit of the Jumoji incident. It's by far one of his best deductions in the show. He boxes in Tanabe as they exchange accusations and retorts, but Orki ultimately gains the upper hand. And he makes a clear distinction in his behavior from Chitanda's, because he completely manhandles Tanabe during the negotiations afterwards. Orki unloaded 31 anthologies onto him, and he planned out how Jumoji's final crime would take place in the Classics Club so he could sell even more copies. This ultimately leads to them selling all 200 of them, exceeding all of their expectations and ending the arc on a very happy note. And from the looks of it, it's about time to head home for the day, so let's wrap this up. We've got 4 main characters whose stories need to come to a close, starting with these two. Here we see Mayuka and Satoshi 1 year ago on Valentine's Day. Mayuka is extremely upset with Satoshi because he wouldn't accept her Valentine's chocolates, and honestly, I would be too, because the excuse he gave was he believes chocolate poured into a form and then cooled and hardened doesn't count as homemade, so because of that, he can't accept it. Oh no. Dude, that is fucking foul. That's forklift driver topples an entire warehouse levels of bad. Mayuka hasn't given up though, and she promises next year she'll make a masterpiece that even he'll have to accept, bringing us to today. Now, as we already know, Satoshi has changed a lot since last year. Orki confirms this for himself when they play at the arcade together. Instead of getting upset and playing exclusively to win like he used to, he opts towards playing for fun and not throwing a tantrum when he loses. Orki goes so far as to predict Satoshi's reaction to this year's chocolates by saying he thinks he'll be thrilled with the whole production. These words gave me hope. Hope that he truly isn't like Tani anymore. Hope that he's moved past whatever the hell this was. When the day finally comes, Orki hangs out in the library to wait out a snowstorm, only for Chitanda to come bursting in with Satoshi to tell him Mayuka's chocolate has been stolen.
What?
It's gone. It's all gone.
What do you mean? I
Valentine's chocolates.
Not anymore, you don't. Poof.
She's understandably really broken up about this because she was there to see how much time and effort went into making it, and the fact that it was stolen under her watch made her believe this was her fault. Tensions only escalate when Mayuka enters the room, but surprisingly, she shrugs it off as if it isn't a big deal, but she implies that she knows a little more than she lets on before abruptly leaving. Orki seems to figure out what's going on and sends an extremely reluctant Chitanda home with the promise that he'll have the chocolates returned to Satoshi by the end of the day, and with that, the two of them begin to walk home. Orki stops him as they cross a bridge and asks for his bag, and with one shake, it starts to seem as though Satoshi hasn't changed at all. He still hasn't come to a conclusion about how to respond to Mayuka's feelings, and just like last year, he ended up doing something really stupid to cover this up. This leads us to the million-dollar question. Why? What reason could anyone have to knowingly hurt one of their closest friends while stomping all over the feelings of another who's even closer? Well, I was wrong about one thing. Satoshi has been changing, but this change has been working against his relationship with Mayuka, not for it. See, if there's one word that perfectly describes his old personality, it's obsessive. He was obsessed with winning, obsessed with being better than everyone else, and obsessed with not being looked down upon. It wasn't a fun way to live, and little by little he turned himself into the happy-go-lucky nutcase who has fun with everything and never gets angry because he refuses to let himself get obsessed with anything. Here's where Mayuka's feelings throw a wrench into his plans. Satoshi cares about her a lot and feels the same way she does. But he knows if he answers her favorably, there's a chance that he'll start to obsess over her, and that terrifies him. He's stuck being asked a question he can't say yes or no to because everything he's worked for over a year has been little more than an elaborate form of escapism. I'm not going to lie, I didn't like Satoshi when I first watched this show. This was one of the most selfish acts I've ever seen a slice of life character commit, and I personally wouldn't be able to tolerate the guilt if I was in his shoes. But after taking the time to try to understand, his character flaws transformed from annoying to compelling when I realized how surprisingly human they are. Talking about how focusing too hard on yourself can cause you to alienate those you care about is such an interesting angle that I rarely see explored in media. And hey, everybody deserves a second chance, or 3 chances. So Satoshi takes it to finally right the wrongs he committed by calling up Mayuka and telling her everything, bringing this snowy Valentine's Day to a close and leaving me with one final story to tell. Episode 22 is the conclusion to Oriki and Chitanda's story, starting with Chitanda asking Oriki if he'll join her in a doll festival parade because her designated parasol carrier was injured, and his response practically marks his personal motto for death.
わかった。行くよ。
Just 5 syllables end up conveying more character growth than most protagonists ever get to see. Oriki has fought against being a dependable person to Chitanda for the entirety of the show. In fact, 2 episodes before this, he engaged in a game with her to prove she can't depend on him, a game he ended up losing. And he continues to lose this game he's been playing for 22 episodes as he hops on his bike and makes his way to Chitanda's location. The shrine where the festival is taking place is very foreign to Oriki. He sits awkwardly as people work hastily all around him. When he goes to see Chitanda, she's getting ready behind a massive wall and tells Oriki to relay a message that doesn't make any sense to him, but the workers understand it immediately. He's clearly out of his comfort zone, somewhere he never would have gone in the past, especially when he dresses up as the parasol carrier, which Satoshi and Mayuka later mock him for wearing because of how out of place he looked. And when he participates in the parade, marching right next to Chitanda, he has a revelation. At first, he laments that his energy conservatism is coming under a deadly threat. He shouldn't have come here, no matter the reason, because today's the day where his desire to live a gray-colored life finally dies. The sakura tree, Hyouka's symbol for a rose-colored life, comes into view as Oriki shifts his attention to Chitanda. He can't see her, at least not from the front, and this drives his curiosity. He wants to know what she looks like in her doll outfit, but his thoughts are disrupted by Satoshi and Mayuka. After hearing from Mayuka that things are better now between her and Satoshi, there's nothing left to do but solve one more admittedly unimportant mystery and head home. Chitanda takes the lead with their conversation as usual, bringing up the history of her home and what it means to her. She's certain that no matter where she goes in life, her final destination will always be this place. It's where she feels she's supposed to be. She wants to fulfill her duties as a member of the Chitanda family. There are 2 ways she can go about doing this. Being a wealthy family of farmers, she can either choose to work in an agricultural or a managerial position. Given how poorly she functioned as a negotiator in the school festival arc though, something both Chitanda and Oriki noticed, she decided to go with agriculture. She doesn't think her position is of any particular significance, but it isn't insignificant either. She doesn't believe that this land that she's bound to is the most beautiful place in the world, or that it's full of potential, or that the people are young and full of life, but it's still where she belongs. It's an incredibly self-content mindset that's just as indicative of her character as it is admirable. She's chosen her place in life, and more importantly, she wanted Oriki to see it. Because whether he knew it or not, ever since he solved the mystery surrounding Chitanda's uncle, he's been building trust and respect with her. Every time he did something to help somebody else, every time he did something with someone else's best interests in mind, none of it went unnoticed, and that's why he's standing where he is today. Oriki thinks for a minute, and then suggests that he can take over the business aspect that Chitanda gave up on. She looks surprised, and then she's caught up in a gust of wind that spills sakura tree petals into the frame, taking us back to before Oriki said what he said as one petal flies over the entire shot. That's what he wants to say, but he's hesitant. He isn't ready to truly give up his way of life for somebody else. He thinks to himself that this must be how Satoshi felt on the bridge, and because of this, he comments that it's starting to get cold. Chitanda takes this opportunity to shut down his escapism one last time with Hyouka's final line.
いいえ、もう春です。
The exact same visual cue comes back to envelop Chitanda and show the audience that even if Oriki isn't ready to accept this new responsibility now, whether or not he will be in the future isn't up for interpretation. I said in the beginning of this video that Hyouka is an odd beast, and I think the reason I believe this is because it's very unassuming. If you gave me a list of the shows I've seen, I could easily name a bombastic characteristic to label each one of them with, except for Hyouka. The color palette is intentionally bland, the mysteries are about ordinary occurrences, and the characters are just normal people. It doesn't seem like an interesting show at all, in fact it looks really boring. I even thought to myself, I don't think I'm going to like this. I'm not a fan of mysteries, but what the hell. It was made by Kyoto Animation, so I'll take a chance on it. Just like Maika said, there are pieces of media that can transcend preferential boundaries. And because I made the choice to take that chance, I got to watch them prove their own point every single episode. There was a lot more to like in Hyouka than I bargained for. I think the characters are phenomenal if that wasn't already obvious given the immense amount of time I dedicated towards telling their stories. The aesthetics complemented the themes and setting of the show perfectly, and the cinematography borders on some of the best in the industry. But more than this, Hyouka taught me the importance of stepping out of my comfort zone, not just when it comes to deciding what I'm going to watch tonight, but with life in general. It taught me that if you can try to fight back against this gray color monotony, if you can try to break away from the unrealistic expectations you hold for everything, if you can try to see the value in the utterly mundane, then maybe you too can find a rose-colored gem of your own.